Hello, and welcome to The Fool and the Philosopher.
The Philosopher and the Fool.
So this will have to be fairly short, I think. But if it's 15 minutes long, it'll probably be our best episode, like, most watched episode yet, so we'll see how we go.
It's funny about shouting how, how some people shout quite often, they're like loud shouty people, and some people are loud like me. But when I actually shout, I forget how damn loud I am. It's like scary, it's like I actually don't shout all that often.
I can't. Just can't get loud.
No, I can get immensely loud. A lot of volume.
So, you wanted to talk about memes.
Yes, I did actually. I was just thinking about that today. So remember all the way back when I rediscovered Karma Sutra Girls, like me listening to it and sending it to you, like 4 months ago or 5?
Kamala dancing.
Yeah,
Yes.
Kamala dancing.
Yes, I do.
Alright, so I was thinking about that. That's a very pure meme. And also, sort of, Charlie the Unicorn is... I didn't like that, but it's sort of... Someone was just making something. Also, Numa Numa, like the first song itself, Drag to Steal. But then the video of Numa Numa where the guy's just like dancing and having fun is like a very pure meme. What I mean by that is they were memes before the concept of meme was a thing, I think. Or, I mean, concept of meme, but how we perceive it as a silly, weird thing. Like, there's people who have YouTube channels where they say, I make memes, and they, like, make a meme format, like the dog bonking people on the head, the Doge, and, like, someone's, like, done their channels, like, 20 different variations of that as their work for the month, and they're, like, a meme maker, and I told you this before, but there's one of the people in my class, my new media class, said, I'm doing it for the meme. And that statement felt gross to me, sort of. No, it felt like people trying to be memey. Oh no, almost feels like trying to capture a past they can no longer capture because the only way to do is not being self-aware of it. But then it just has to happen by happenstance. Which I think a lot of the best memes, so to say, on the online format are things created by happenstance. And I was just thinking about how kind of the purity of memes has, I don't know, almost been degraded. It's weird to think of something, because you sort of think of memes as sort of like a weed smoke-laden, sort of crusty, weird things. I don't know. That's how I sort of feel about them. Like, sort of, they have a unhealthy layer of pessimism seeping into them a lot of the time. But the earlier memes are just like pure joy of someone just creating something and putting it out there.
I think the usage of the word has changed.
Yeah.
And I think channels that make memes, in quotation marks,
Yeah.
would more aptly be called meme researchers. Similar to Philosopher. You are not committing to an idea, you are throwing out 20 ideas and seeing which one sticks and which one resonates with people.
Yeah.
And I think that when people are saying that's a meme or I make memes, you're often getting people... There is a recognized connection between them. You can recognize something that is memey versus something that is not.
Yeah.
So it is describing something, but it's not the original concept of an idea that is shared, because a lot of these modern memes die out rather quickly, which is the antithesis of a meme.
Yeah. Whereas the old ones resurface and stick around.
I think YouTube itself has become very similar.
Yeah.
What we're doing right now, a podcast, might be closer to the old idea of YouTube, the idea of expressing yourself.
Yeah.
But even the fact that it's a regular thing is quite different from how it used to be. You would put like the funniest video you ever made on YouTube or something.
Yeah.
And it's just there. And if people like it, then suddenly it's the most popular video on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays, people attempt to make those over and over again, and it's become more like public radio or public television.
Yeah.
Which I think is fine, but it is definitely different from the original idea of... You wouldn't watch two videos back in 2007.
Yeah.
you wouldn't watch two videos by the same creator.
Unless there's like the insanely talented people like Smosh.
Yeah.
And like their original writing, when those two guys were young, they were brilliant.
But they were, or like Bretts and Bretta.
Yeah, Bretts and Bretta.
They were the original sort of
sketch comedian on YouTube.
Yeah, trying to turn it into something.
Yeah.
Like, YouTube basically allowed for Monty Python to be done by anyone.
Yeah.
I think what it is the commodification of talent. So you had people that were putting videos on YouTube because they liked them to share it with people.
Yeah.
You had people that made a funny picture and put it on the internet and everyone liked it. And I think you were discussing this a little bit previously, where video games have followed a similar route, where they were created by people. Well, they were created for money, I think, but they were created with a vision.
Yeah, it was created as artistic.
A lot of the early video game creators were kids who grew up in the 80s with programming knowledge.
Yeah.
And they would submit their games to magazines. And then people could type in the code directly from the magazine, or they could order a CD from the magazine, or a floppy disk.
Yeah.
And then they could play the kid's game, like a 15-year-old kid's game or something. And then those kids would go on to make bigger things because the magazines are like, hey, you're making us a bit of money.
Yeah.
And the kids were like, okay, now that I have money and I have experience, I'm going to make my dream game.
Yeah.
And that's how games like Ultima and Elder Scrolls were made.
Yeah, well, so I've been playing a game recently. I think it was on your wish list, but you might have taken it off. And it's called Blood Rain 2. It's about a half vampire or vampire.
It wasn't on my wish list, but I think I know the game.
Yeah,
it just got a remaster?
I don't know, but it was on sale on the Steam. And it's like the terminal cut or something is what I got.
Yeah, that's the remaster, I think.
So I got the second game because...
It was an update after 15 years.
Mm-hmm. And I got the second game because the first one, although it also had a terminal cut, it's just... Apparently the second game has better combat. And the combat of Blood Rain is incredible. So it's about like graphical, like its appearance. It's on par, it's on par with Vampire the Masquerade. Like I think they put a little bit more work into their scenery, and maybe their models are slightly more work put into them. But there's a few other janky things that Vampire Masquerade does better. But its combat feels really, really in depth, and it's a very simple game. It has two pieces of core gameplay loop. One of them is fighting enemies, and the other is doing parkour, or traversing parkour. The fighting the enemies feels really good, and the parkour can feel really good, but it's just frustrating as hell if you mess it up. But I was thinking about, like, compared even to newer games and the gameplay I've seen of newer games, they're like not as good at this game.
You know, it's very funny. I think a lot of games are designed around something. I don't think you meant it in this way necessarily. Yeah. But a lot of games are actually based around the concept of a gameplay loop.
Yeah.
And I think that is partly the problem. It's very reductive. If you take... actually, I think Bethesda does this really well.
Yeah.
If you wanted to define games in terms of gameplay loops, which is saying the game tells you, do this thing, then that leads to this thing, that leads to this thing, that leads to this thing. So Mario would be jump on Goombas, get power-ups, get to the goal, move on the map, that takes you to the start. And so that's Mario's gameplay loop.
Yeah.
You repeat it over and over again, and hopefully that repetition is enjoyable.
Yeah.
But, and I think it works for a game like Mario, possibly.
Yeah.
But I think it also is actually missing out. Mario is also a game about exploration and secrets, which...
Well, this game's so much about exploration, but it's exploration in a really weird way.
But, but you didn't... You said it's about parkour and combat, right?
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of indie games, especially, are taking the advice of building in gameplay loops. And that's why we have these roguelites, sorry.
Yeah.
Progressive arcades, as I like to call them now, because I think...
That's a good name for them.
I think they're more based around repeated play and addiction rather than struggle and strategy. And so I think a lot of modern games are getting based around this idea of you do this task over and over again, you do this task over and over again. Yeah. If you look at the game that came up, I think JRPGs are a great example of this, where Actually, they're not, but they could look like one.
Yeah.
You fight, then you get a bit of story, then you fight, then you get a bit of story.
Yeah.
But that's pretty boring sounding. Like, there's a reason people love JRPGs. Mm-hmm. And they get emotionally attached to them. They form parasocial friendships within the game. Mm-hmm. And you don't get that from just a loop.
Yeah.
I don't think any game, or very few games, are actually based purely on just a mechanical addictive loop, except games like Cookie Clicker and whatnot, which are kind of a form of modern art. But I think that is what is causing... It's the commodification of ideas. So you say, oh, this is what led to success. Mm-hmm. Therefore, we are going to make our game based on this.
Yeah.
And I think...
well, I feel like with this game, literally the combat was... Well, if you do this, then obviously this happens, so let's put this in the game. Like, literally... So the game is quite violent. And it's probably, in some ways, one of the most violent video games I've played. Because you cut off people's arms and legs and cut people in half. Although the graphics are a point, and they didn't put a bunch of work into making it gross out. It's more of this is what happens. But there's scenes where you're fighting someone, and your main character has these two massive blades. And you cut off one of their legs. And the enemy at that point is dead. But they will hop along on the leg going, my leg, and they'll try to run away from you, and then they'll fall to the ground and crawl a distance and die. But while they're doing that, you could also cut off their head or something. Or if you cut off their arm, then they'll clutch their arm and run away, and they'll be injured. And so it just sort of has this thing, or if you're fighting a group of enemies, and you're really beating them, then they run away. But if more friends show up, then they'll turn around and come back. So that's just a part of it, but so I looked at the controls, and it's gives you basic controls, and it says these are combos you can do. And there's huge list of combos, but just random movesets, I guess. But there's other things in this game, you have this, you can knock people flying, and they've just scattered randomly about, there's, on the game map, there's a rhino head. And if you throw an enemy, then the game's basically programmed to make them land on the rhino head and get impaled by it. It has a bunch of different stuff like that. And it's just very much can I do this? Oh, I can. That's awesome. There's rail grinding at one point. And if you can hold out your blades, and if enemies are nearby while you're rail grinding, then you cut them in half because you go by. And it's very satisfying combat in which it's can I do that? Oh, I can. They actually thought of that. And it makes the combat feel very, I don't know, just really, really good. It's they put a lot of thought and effort into the combat. And I was told apparently that there's other games with even better combat than this game. It's I haven't played them. And then the person said, well, you're playing the wrong video games. Which, it's fair enough.
And Doom Eternal, I think, would be a game that has amazing combat.
Yeah, well, he was saying Prototype and Matrix Redux also have very good combat.
I think what you're getting at, possibly, I could be wrong here.
Well, sorry, but it's this older game, though, they just had an idea and went with it, and it sort of had this spark of, creativity, and much like Vampire the Masquerade, it's this sort of,
But also what you're talking about is how everything you do, if you're hey, I wish I could do that, or that would be cool if I could do that, and you can.
Yeah.
I think that's what the developers thought, too.
Yeah.
Breath of the Wild, I think, actually ended up similar.
Yeah, no, that's actually... this combat feels a lot like Breath of the Wild. It's make Breath of the Wild extremely violent and a game made in the 2000s.
I think the Doom remake is similar to that too. And Doom Eternal.
Yeah.
But a lot of games made for Amazon is a great example of a company that's just saying, well, we have a lot of money, let's just tell people to make a game until we have a game and then we make money.
Yeah.
And I think Square
Enix?
Maybe? I always get those mixed up because there's FromSoft, Squaresoft, Square Enix, something like that. Anyways, the ones that made Marvel's Avengers.
Yeah.
They're making games with a checklist. They're saying, okay, numbers should appear when you hit someone. You should be able to juggle people. You should be able to do this. And you're getting games that are, if you went to the developers and said, why did you add this feature? I think a lot of the time they'd say, because that's how it's done.
Yeah. Well, just you're saying you should juggle people. So this game has a completely unintended thing that happened, which is basically juggling people, whereas one of your powers, because you're a vampire, is you can slow down time, so it basically activates bullet time. However, you have a limited amount of bullet time, and there's a way to play this game where you can basically insta-kill any enemy, but that's no fun. And with this bullet time, it screws up the physics of the game a bit, because you're slightly faster, your reactions, than everything else that's being slowed down. And so one of your moves is you can shoot a grappling hook and directly fling people about in the air. And they have physics, so if someone collides with someone else, they both take damage and get knocked over. And so with the bullet time, what you can do is you can freeze, like basically slow time, grab someone, lift them in the air, grab someone else, lift them in the air, and then while they're in the air, because you have so much like slow perspective, you can grappling hook the people in the air and start dragging them about. And so I literally threw someone off a roof, then grabbed them, pulled them back up on the roof, and then knocked them off it again. And it's sort of like, I feel like they just wanted the mechanics of, you can drag people about with this, and you can slow down time, and it changes the physics engine, and then it added juggling to the game, where you can literally juggle enemies, but it wasn't, this game needs juggling, it was, this is something that happened because of the way we made the game.
Yeah, I find a lot of Nintendo games are interesting in that Nintendo doesn't like modding.
Yeah.
But when you mod the games, they tend not to break. It's like, I saw a video recently done by Smallhand where gravity changes direction every 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And what I find fascinating is that if Mario hits the underside of a building, he can walk around on it when gravity's reversed. That isn't necessarily
that a lot of video games could do.
Something that would happen in a lot of games.
Yeah.
But Nintendo puts the work in so that... I think why they do it actually is efficiency. I think it makes games smaller.
Yeah.
It makes it so they can break more if you don't... Because you're...
Well, I can even confirm that with a video game I made myself, where I couldn't remember how to make a sprite face a different direction. And I also couldn't remember how to properly create a physics engine, so I took someone's coding online. And I had to make this sprite basically duplicate itself to turn around. And the amount of bugs I created by not actually having a proper physics engine, but by just copying something that worked, was heinous.
I think what happens is you have hard-coded things.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of pathfinding you can do in video games that makes pathfinding very simple. The calculation's very simple. And it's like I forget what it's called. It's like a mesh grid or something. Yeah. And you place it down on the map. And then your character essentially snaps from node to node, but there's a walking animation played in between. Yeah. And it works great, and you can't really tell the difference of a freeform movement.
Yeah.
However, if you were to mod the game to add like a jump ability, let's say, like if you were playing a game like Diablo and you added jump, it would potentially break horribly or not work at all.
Well, I mean, Diablo even shows that with the Stinking Barbarian's jump, how you can skip the game. And, like, you fundamentally break things with the Barbarian's jump.
But I'm not talking about breaking balance or anything. Yeah. I mean, it might not work at all.
Yeah, the game might just cease to work. Like, whenever people try to mod Heroes of Might and Magic 4, it's messy.
Yeah. So, and another example might be... Well, this is just getting into... Like, in Total War, you can't use a feature called supplies, I think, if you are fighting in custom battles, because the orcs and dark elves and undead use that same number tracker to track it. That's more just of a hack. That's not that the developers did. That's not so much. But that is an issue with hard coding that makes modding harder. Whereas Nintendo, I think, they just create a physics engine and they create a world.
And then they link it together after that.
And then they make sure that the game feels about right. But if you can like triple jump over a wall that you're not meant to go over, they just go, well, good for you. And they in Mario Odyssey, they actually put like stacks of treasure sometimes on top of walls that are hard or impossible to get to, just in case you go up there. Yeah, which I think is really cool. And
it's probably a 50% of Korax.
Yeah, well, I think Korax are just like, here's a neat feature. Let's just this is a place people will go anyways. Let's stick something there. But I think that what I'm trying to get at there, I guess, is that the games are made from... They're like a physics engine rather than a series of events you have to complete in order. You don't click on A, click on B, click on A. Like, it's like, okay, you can go anywhere and within the restrictions, do anything within the restrictions. And if you find an alternate solution or you break something... That's the price we pay for giving you freedom.
Well, even so...
So, like this Blood Rain game, they might have never even meant for the juggling to exist, but they're like, hey, if you got the skill, do it.
Yeah. Well, again, there's even, like... There's problems with this game that also Vampire the Masquerade had, which would never be in a modern video game, which is, so the very first boss battle I got into, I had no health and no stamina charge, and the bosses are immune to vampire biting, which is how you heal yourself. And so the fight became really, really, really hard, and it's meant to be like, oh, this is just how you like learn to fight a boss and use the blood rage ability. I had no stamina to use the blood rage ability. I had no health. I couldn't heal. And so I had to, like, actually learn to play the game well. Whereas in modern video games, like, okay, you're fighting the first boss, he has to be hard, but you have to, like, you're given basically tools to beat him. Whereas this game's like, oh, well, this boss just sort of happened to you. And on the sort of thoughts, though, of what you're saying about Nintendo, I feel like their game developers actually even still have passion.
Well, it's because it's Miyamoto still.
Yeah.
Like, they haven't changed.
Yeah, but they have, like, Metroid Dread, game that's being developed for, like, what, almost 20 years? Like, 15 years or something? And they're like, sorry, we can't release a Metroid game because it's not good enough. Or Breath of the Wild's like, we've been working on this game, we can't show you any footage. And then finally it's like, here's some footage, and we hope to get this game, like, done later. But they're, like, actually making the game, and people sort of hope for that with Cyberpunk, and then...
I think CD Projekt Red is a great example of a company... Well, they're weird. They're making a game because they're passionate, I think.
Yeah.
But they're also... They have no idea what they're doing in terms of why they're doing things. So, yeah. The first Witcher, I think... Unless it was based on Gothic or something, it might have been. But it seems like it was a fairly original idea. Like, here's our game. We like this book. We're going to make a game based on this book. Here's all our systems because we want to emulate the book. A lot of them are janky and unfun or slow, but we have this game.
Yeah.
The second game wanted to be more modern and flashy, so they added in a huge amount of QuickTime events.
Yeah.
And I think if you ask them why, they'd say, well, to make it look cinematic. And you'd say, why do you want your game to look cinematic? And they'd say, well, because that's what AAA companies do.
Mm-hmm.
And...
It's just funny, on the terms of cinematic, do you know what old game cinematics mean? So in Blood Rain, after you beat the first chapter of the game, it switches, and some of the graphics is, like, turned up to 11. Like, that's probably that render there, like, takes up a core of the game size file, and it probably took, like, several weeks for them to render this whole scene. Like, the graphics is, like, insane. That's what a video game cinematic is like...
I think video games have had a flaw for a very long time. Like, modern ones especially.
Yeah.
The old ones didn't have this problem because they couldn't.
Yeah.
They want to be cinematic. They want to be like movies. But they have every advantage over movies.
Mm-hmm.
They're interactive, so they win on basically any front.
They make more money.
Than movies. Mm-hmm. And yet they're trying to emulate the weaker medium. And the reason that... The one advantage that movies have is they can be very carefully directed. They can restrict freedom to give you the exact shot they want and the exact angle you want, and so you have the exact experience that they want.
Yeah.
Which is antithetical to games.
Yeah.
And I don't know why games are trying to emulate them. And QuickTime events are like, well, we want cinematics, but it's a game, so you have to press a button. And
it's interactive cinematics.
It adds the worst of both. And so... with YouTube, you have people that are trying to be wacky and crazy and emulate something like, I don't know, the Numa Numa thing.
Yeah.
Or you have people that try and just play video games until they get that Leroy Jenkins moment.
Yeah.
Or Leroy Jenkins was apparently, like, the whole thing was scripted.
Yeah.
It was just a sketch some friends made together.
Yeah.
And... YouTube's become TV, which is fine.
Well, even, like, so, a thing I made recently, which you said is probably one of the greatest things I made, was the joke on Starfield. And that came from me and you talking. I was like, you know what, I'm going to do this. And its style could be called very meme-y, or meme-ish to what I guess is considered that style. However, that's the only way I could do that, because, like, that's the only way I'm good at animating, is animating like that. And so...
I don't think that matters. Yeah. And also, don't fall into... Well, there's a trap of... we had this feminist person come to my high school one time. Yeah. Very overweight, with short hair and giant hoop earrings. And she said, I dress like this because the stereotypical woman is skinny and has like little earrings and long hair. And I don't want to be a stereotype.
Yeah.
I don't want to be defined by society.
Yeah.
But she had dressed in reaction to society being as defined it by someone that went out of their way to follow the exact stereotype.
Yeah.
Like most women are roughly following the cultural standard of women, but they aren't following it perfectly.
Yeah.
They might have short hair, or they might have like the big earring or something. Like
Yeah.
every woman's going to be a little bit, they're going to do like 80 to 90% of the woman mold, but they're going to not do all of it. But she, by doing the exact opposite, was kind of doing 100% of the societal definition of a woman, just in reverse. And
so you're saying don't try to avoid doing memes?
So if you're having fun making this,
yeah, I did have fun with it. I'm just saying that's just that's the way I made it.
And that style is the way you can do it.
Yeah.
And like, I don't see why you would want to do something else. Like it got the message across. It was very easy on the eyes. Like I don't see a reason to actually do it differently.
Yeah.
And I think that like people like, it's very similar to the Internet Historian's animation. Yeah. And I think he's just doing that because that's what he can do and he finds it fun and everything.
Yeah. It works as well.
It works. And so I think that there's nothing wrong with people generating these meme things.
Yeah.
And they're all just people like you having fun. They're even if they use the term memester or I like
I'm saying like there's just like it's fine that they do. I'm more saying like just the accidental sort of like, oh hey, isn't that something?
Yeah. No. I don't see you criticizing it. It's more just this is happening.
Yeah.
And it's worth observing. It's a shift from and that's why the entire internet, like we're talking about video games and whatnot, but the internet as a whole I think is a great example of a tamed, so it used to be kind of like the Wild West. Anything went.
Yeah.
And now there is rules. There is like you can't customize your YouTube channel like you used to be able to.
Yeah.
You have Facebook, not MySpace. MySpace you could do whatever. Facebook you can't. And the thing about YouTube and Facebook, for the most part, is they've got some very smart, very talented people designing your pages now. They're probably looking better than anything you could do if you could customize it yourself.
Yeah.
But you can't. And you're lacking. A lot of people use something like WordPress or Squarespace, and I think those do give you the freedom. It's just harder because you have to learn how to get the freedom from them. But if you look at older websites that people just made on their own, they're often worse looking.
Yeah, well, but that's exactly the Squarespace site I made for our dad. It couldn't do things that I wanted it to do as someone who's also actually made a website by programming. However, it's the nicest looking website I've ever made. It's just, it couldn't do what I wanted it to do.
I haven't used Squarespace. I've used WordPress, and WordPress gives you the option to do everything else. It's just, you have to go outside and...
Yeah, no, the Squarespace doesn't let you do that.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, not Squarespace. GoDaddy is what I used.
Well, GoDaddy is just a web hosting site.
Yeah.
Not a web making site, I don't think.
No, it's a web making site.
They have that as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyways, that's... Also, so on regards though of you saying it's sort of untamed and stuff, I want to move to D&D from that thought, because we've been playing basically, was it Renaissance?
Basic Expert.
Yeah, basic.
Old school Renaissance Labyrinth Lord.
Yeah. And as we go along, a lot of times we have to come up with our own rulings on things because we have no DM. And I've also been playing 5th edition D&D, and there's certain things in it, and it's like, okay, there's a DM, and I think DMs definitely have a place, and I like DMs being, but the difference, I've noticed this for a long time, even just the edition we played with our dad, which was a weird 1st edition and 2nd edition mix because of the books we had, versus other editions like 3rd edition and 5th edition. And so you sort of get those things, and then there's also these YouTubers, they make absolutely brilliant videos, like Joe Cat's videos on Guide to Everclass, and the Animated Spellbook is really good, and there's a lot of people who make very good content about D&D. But it's weird because when I watch them, And there is self-awareness sometimes in it, but like the animated spellbook, the guy's like telling you about the rules, and it's like, this is the optimal thing, and this spell's really good for doing this, and if you want like the potential for infinite damage, use these spells. And also even on Reddit sometime, there's a Reddit about builds for 5th edition, like what is the highest damage build you can get in 5th edition D&D, and certain things like, oh, if you want a class that can do this, then play this class. If you want someone who can do this, play this class. And sort of like a lot of times it's either like turning it into a game guide of how to do something or explain things in a certain way, but also their formed opinions are wrong.
Well, I think what's happening is what you're talking about isn't actually possible in Basic Expert and Original. And I think the reason is that there aren't rules for all these things, and therefore you can't use the rules in order to do things.
Yeah.
And that is probably why the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons guide says that players should not read this guide. Because if they know that there are rules governing things they do, instead of the things they do being actions that they are taking, then they will think in terms of rules. There's something, I think it's called the skill trap, I've heard it described as.
Yeah.
And the idea is that a skill system is a fun idea to add to a role-playing game. Like, oh, my guy's good at foraging and horseback riding, so he has foraging and horseback riding skills.
Yeah.
But what happens is players will then, if they see a problem, they will look to their skill list to see which skill can solve their problem. And if they don't have that skill, they won't try to do anything.
Yeah.
And they'll say, oh, I can't do this. Like, oh, you've put this tightrope in our way, but none of us have acrobat skills, so you've just given us an impossible problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the entire thief class actually was controversial because it does that.
Yeah.
It at like, oh, now I can't sneak in shadows, and now I can't do this, and now I can't do this, and now I can't backstab, now I can't pickpocket.
Yeah.
There are rules for doing that, but the danger is there definitely of the thief completely overshadowing players doing what they want.
Yeah.
And so I think what's happening is, it's weird because I think 5th edition is trying to be more of a role-playing game and less of a just straight-up hack-and-slash dungeon crawler type game.
Yeah.
Except by adding so many rules, it's like they've reached a tipping point where they have so many rules that you can't step outside them, which means that Basic Expert, which I think is the least amount of rules of any version of D&D, actually is a better role-playing game.
Well, I think Basic Expert could be incredible for a role-playing, like you...
Because you have freedom.
Yeah, you have it, like, if you have a DM with Basic Expert and, like, a group of people, you could basically roleplay as much as you want, and, like, the simple amount of rules with it, and then, like, a DM just making those calls.
What I thought was really interesting was that we fought a bunch of mites.
Yeah.
Which are like these tiny little humanoid creatures.
Yeah, and when we say tiny, we mean like they're probably like less than a foot tall.
Yeah. There was like 12 of them. And I was thinking about this afterwards, our fight.
Yeah.
So what we did was we set a giant fire, and we used a bit of physics to
open a door.
Like a pulley system, essentially, to open a door, so that the mites would have to run through the fire to get to us. Yeah. And then we shot them across the fire, so that if they stood still, we'd hurt them. If they charged us, they'd have to run through fire. Yeah. And they're very slow, so the fire would constantly burn them. So their only options were to hide or to fight.
Yeah.
And we rolled on the reaction that they chose to fight. But what I thought was interesting afterwards was our fighter and our cleric didn't actually contribute at all to that fight.
No.
And our dwarf and our wizard, like dwarves are kind of thief-fighter multi-class.
Yeah.
He didn't really fight or thief, and the wizard didn't cast a single spell.
Yeah.
So you could have done what we did with any, because there was just two guys shooting that whole time. Yeah. Any two classes in the game could have done what we did.
Yeah.
The classes don't actually matter nearly as much as the players in Basic Expert, at least at a low level.
Yeah.
And I imagine even later on, it's about having your cool items and whatnot.
Even then, we were like considering his wizard using a lot of his spells to solve our problem, but it was just not the right solution of having his wizard cast a spell, and almost the idea of wizards having like, I have about 2 spells I can cast.
It doesn't actually matter, it turns out.
Yes, well, I know there's this thought of like 5th editions add the cantrip to the wizard, so they can throw a firebolt or whatever, and so that just stops your wizard from being basically a guy who casts a few spells and then slings stones. And while I like cantrips, I think there should be no combat cantrips. I actually think all combat cantrips should be removed. And why I think they add is because a lot of people probably playing in older editions felt useless as a wizard, because like, I'm out of my spells, what can I do now? And there's two things to that, which is wizards used to be the only guys, I know this is like the limit things, but they used to be the guys who could use wands, and so wizards would use wands, and also wizards have spell scrolls, and you can cast spells from that. But also, as you're saying, like a wizard
can do anything.
Why
don't you hide in shadows and backstab? Why
won't you like climb up the cliff while the fire's fighting, and with your piddly wizard arms shove a boulder over?
Well, that's the thing about basic as well. Because there is no bonuses for having... There's no class bonuses for having an attribute.
Yeah.
So a fighter isn't a better fighter because they have high strength.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, that's the one situation where they kind of are. But everyone's better for having high strength.
Yeah.
But a wizard with high intelligence just levels up faster. They don't actually get any... They don't get more spells or anything. And what that means is that you can very happily play a 5 intelligence wizard with 18 strength.
Yeah.
Which might actually be a better wizard to play than an 18 intelligence 5 strength wizard.
Yeah.
Because what it means is after you run out of spells, you're a very good fighter.
Yeah.
And so it means that your attributes are far more interesting.
Yeah.
Because
also, like
the only attribute that matters in 5th edition is the one that...
Your core attribute.
And dexterity.
And dexterity. And... Yep, nope, that's it.
Yeah, maybe constitution.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that a wizard is the same as everyone else, except they have spells. So actually, a wizard can do more than anyone else.
Yeah, whereas...
Even if they only have one spell.
Like, a cantrips, I actually feel like really...
I think cantrips are a neat idea. Like, if they're really reined in. Like, you can start small fires with your hand or something.
Yeah.
But, like, the Eldritch Blast, for example...
Yeah.
Is, like, a stronger magic missile that you can cast infinite times.
Well, even then, like, Firebolt, Ghost Hand, Spare the Dying, Holy Radiance.
Like, I would...
Those spells I just listed are, like, semi-decent level 1 spells in 1st edition. Like, Holy Radiance, every single thing around you takes 1d6 radiant damage if they don't save. And so it's only, like, things right next to you. And it's a cleric spell. But as a cleric, you walk into a group of people, you've just hit, like, 8 people surround you with 1d6 radiant damage. Or the Ghostly Hand is like, if you cast it on undead, it gives them disadvantage. This spell literally, like, makes undead worse. Spare the Dying is another cleric spell, which is, if someone's dying, you can say, no, you aren't. And it's just, like, something a cleric can do.
Yeah, my 5th edition, like, quick fix for the wizards, I think, would be basically get rid of all cantrip options except prestidigitation and break that up into like 5 different spells, and then you can get 3 of those or something.
Yeah.
Because, prestidigitation, like, you can move an object up to 10 feet away if it weighs less than a pound.
Yeah.
That's cool. Or you can light a fire up to 10 feet away.
You can make your voice louder. You can open and close doors.
You can appear taller, I think?
Yeah, you can close. It's basically, prestidigitation lets you do the scene in Lord of the Rings where Gandalf swells up, speaks in a loud voice, and makes everything darker.
Yeah, and I think those are all really cool. So give your wizard like 3 of those, and those are great cantrips.
Yeah.
Because the cleverness should come from the players more than the tools. And, like, of course the cantrips are great tools, but having limited tools also means that you're thinking for efficiency, and you're also thinking about alternatives.
A lot of times 5th edition has added caveats to tons of spells, like, this spell cannot do this. Like, the fire you light with this spell cannot hurt anyone. And there's tons of little caveats to almost stop creativity within spells in 5th edition. So they do their purpose as it is.
I think 5th edition, it also has the issue that there is an answer to every solution baked into the characters.
Yeah.
For example, like, this is a bit extreme, but if 5th edition characters were faced with our might problem, fighting way more than you, creatures that are... Each individual might was stronger than all of our characters except the fighter, basically.
And the dwarf.
maybe the dwarf, because they like their only disadvantage is they're slow, but they have more health than all of us.
Yeah.
And they do D3 damage, so they're weak, but the health is huge.
Yeah.
Because they're going to take 2 hits and we're only going to take 1, basically. Or they're going to take 4 and we're going to take 2.
Yeah.
And
we are outnumbered.
We were massively outnumbered. So in 5th edition, I think there would have been, like the equivalent would be there's an open door spell, and then there's a like firewall spell, and then there's a then you have your rangers shooting, and or if you come across a chasm, there's a like invisible bridge spell or a pass, or like, oh, here's a river, here's water walk, which is in basic as well.
Yeah.
But it seems like by level 3 in 5th edition.
Or I use my acrobatic skill or swimming skill to get across the river.
Yeah, exactly. And all the other characters are like, oh, I don't have a swimming skill. Mm-hmm. Well, I'll just have to make a rope bridge. And so everyone's looking through like if you come to a river in 5th edition, the cleric walks across, the
wizard floats.
The wizard floats. The thief like swings on a branch.
Yeah.
And the fighter uses mighty leap or something.
Or athletics to swim.
And everyone's just looking at their skill. Whereas in basic, you work together to figure out how to make a raft.
Yeah.
And also, in basic, you can instantly die from trying to failing a swim check. So you do not take that lightly.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a purity there.
Mm-hmm.
Of I don't.
Well, not even like purity's sort of it, but it's not so like, oh, I'm pure, I'm better than you. It's more of like boiled down, like in its simple form, it works
and
better.
The great thing about it is that if you want, like mutations aren't baked into the game.
Yeah.
But you just find someone's list of 1,000 mutations. Bam, you have them. You want more traps? Get someone's trap list.
Yeah.
You want more classes? Class list. You want swimming? And 5th edition, it's a bit harder to like wrangle in, say, a crafting system or something.
Yeah.
I think it's still very doable. But now the interesting thing is, I've printed off a lot of classes and stuff for basic. But I noticed after we played that, like, I don't know if I should. And not that it's bad, but it's like, they don't matter.
Yeah, well, you were kind of surprised when I selected a fighter.
Well, no, I just really wanted, like, some of those magic users are really cool.
Yeah.
But I've been looking at the bard specifically.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, he can get retainers for free. That's really cool.
Yeah.
But everything else, he's just like a wizard thief.
Yeah.
And I would rather just say, okay, you can learn a thief skill or something, or you can learn a spell.
Well, I've actually was putting my mind to that because, like, so the Biomancer actually has very unique spells, and I like that he has a different spell, as he's a different way of operating.
It's from the Glog Wizards, which are amazing.
But so I was thinking, how would I go about making a class for this game, or class/race, because they're kind of the same idea. And like the Amazon just seems like a different fighter.
They're like a prestige fighter.
Yeah, and
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and well, I was thinking like there's a dwarf, there's a halfling, like these things are sort of like they're combinations sort of idea, but a dwarf is very much like their resistances kind of make them what they are, and they're being able to find things. And so I like talked about the dryad earlier, like they have vines, but my other thought is almost a different kind of dwarf, which is because I also talked about a different guy, which is the was archaeologist, but he's definitely like a retainer or hireling of a guy who's really good at finding traps, but he's like super squishy. And so my thought was of like a pixie. And so they're tiny, so they can fit through tons of spaces. But because they're tiny, they can't actually wield proper weapons. They have to like hold a needle in their hand. And it's a needle. What damage are you going to do with a needle? So like they deal no damage. And also, what sort of hits can they take? They like have 1 hit point, and they level up, they get 2 hit points. But they're really small, and they float. So they're not actually on the ground. So they don't trigger traps, they're on the ground. And they give off light. So they're like a floating light source. And so they can like basically scout ahead and zip through a dungeon. However, they're also glowing. So they can't sneak through the dark. And like, that was my thought, like, this is how I would create a new class, is this pixie.
The one risk with something like that is they're solving problems in the game that make the game what it is.
Yeah.
You are avoiding light and traps. You're avoiding 2 of like the 5 elements of the game.
Yeah. But that it was just my thoughts there. How would I?
Yeah. Which it might be fine. Like in practice, it might work fine. But it is the risk of adding classes to the game.
And even with that, they create new problems because sometimes you don't want a light, and this person's a light that can't go out.
Yeah, which is fun. That's cool. What I was thinking would be a like overall better system that I think like they kind of do in 3rd edition actually and 2nd edition is rather than adding classes, add subclasses.
Yeah.
But subclasses I think make the players think too much in terms of like subclasses are basically just classes. Like, do I want to be a cavalier or a knight?
Yeah.
Instead, like, you know my perk system from First Heroes?
Yeah.
What if you just add perks to the game? Like, I'm going to be a fighter. It's like, okay, and can I have, like, cure light wounds? And it's like, yeah, sure. But you are, you have to use the dwarf's, to, like, THACO progression.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, fair. Or the thief's THACO progression or something. It's like, okay, I'll take that trade.
Yeah.
And so just make it individual. Like, stick to... I even think the, like, elf and dwarf and halfling are debatable. But they're there and they're fun.
Yeah.
The halfling especially. But, you know, if someone says, like, I want to be a bard, don't add a bard class to the game, maybe. Just say, like, hey, my thief, like, he's, like, 18 charisma. Can I, like, maybe even later in the game, like, you're level 3, and you're like, my thief has 18 charisma. Can I just have a power where, like, I get retainers for free or 1 gold off per day or something? And then the GM, this is what a GM's for.
Yeah.
Could be like, yeah, sure, but you spend all your time learning to charm people, so you don't know how to disarm traps, or you disarm traps as someone like 2 levels lower or something.
Yeah.
And I think that might be the way to do it, rather. Like, they added, there's advanced classes, the illusionist and the druid.
Yeah.
And I don't like either. Because the illusionist is a wizard with a different set of spells.
Yeah.
And the druid is a cleric with a different set of spells.
Yeah.
And I think that... I'm not sure about the illusionist. Maybe I just don't like the idea of an illusionist in general. But a druid, I think, could be done really interestingly. But they shouldn't use the exact same mechanics as the cleric.
Yeah.
They should do something else. Like, they should have unlimited spell casting, but you have to be in a green area and their spells are really weak or something.
Well, I came up with a wizard that sort of breaks 5th edition, which he takes only mechanics that already exist in 5th edition. So he's the ritualist. And he sort of has his own like spell list, but he can like draw from other spells. But he only casts spells as rituals. And because of that, and he doesn't have spell slots. And rituals, the whole thing is they don't use up a spell slot. So this guy can literally cast any spell and he can cast them a limited amount of times. Just a ritual takes 10 minutes to complete. So in combat, your ritualist is like going to cast a fireball. That takes 10 minutes. Combat's over. So like his use of fireball would be, if he was ever to use a combat spell, he'd start a ritual before the fight, then cast it. And it's weird because he's sort of utility, but like if he has that limitation, he might as well even go, all right, this is my ritualist. He's going to strap on a sword and shield and go into the fight. And he's not a fighter, but I'm not going to take away from him that because he's a wizard's like class. He goes in and fights, and then he will do his rituals elsewhere. And like that's a very different kind of wizard. Is like a wizard that actually can't use spells immediately.
But I think the way to add characters like that is case by case, not to even necessarily define a class.
Yeah.
Although there's good ideas out there. Like if someone's like, oh, I love the idea of a ritualist, then sure. And if everyone in the party likes it, then everyone can be a ritualist.
Yeah.
But I think it should just be, hey, can we try this? And it's, yeah, all right.
Yeah.
You can be one, and then if people like it, we'll add it in. But don't maybe add classes, because I think Basic actually has too many classes as it is with 5, in a way.
Yeah.
Because the game isn't about what class you are.
Yeah.
And 5th edition, it's very fun to build a character because you're like, oh boy, look at these options.
Yeah.
But like you have to start like 50 campaigns in order to actually experience everything they have.
Yeah, and 5th edition is
I think they're trying to make something for everyone though.
Which 5th edition is also kind of about the character you play, which is also kind of funny because the most common characters is a human fighter. That's like by far outstrips everything else of characters picked.
But I think basic characters are actually have like almost more love and backstory behind them because, well, you have to.
Yeah.
There's more freedom to actually like talk about their lives and stuff.
Well, even so, so the fighter has 3 subclasses, right? They have Eldritch Knight. I mean, this is basic without anything else. So they have Eldritch Knight, which is a wizard fighter, and I despise them. There is, I can't remember his name, but he has like these special action dice where he's like, I can trip my opponent, I can superiority dice, I can trip my opponent, I can get a parry, I can advance, I can retreat. Then there's the champion, which is, I'm a fighter who's more fighter. Like, that's literally the subclass is, add some fighter to your fighter. And if I was ever to play a fighter, I'd probably play a champion. That or a cavalier, because the cavalier is just a fighter on a horse. But he's just like a fighter with more fighter, and then you can focus on doing stuff as a character more than, oh, I'm a fighter with this spell, or, oh, how should I use my superiority dice? You're just like, I'm going to hit stuff with my sword. I'm a fighter. Although even with that, like, you don't have to hit stuff with your sword. Because almost like, looking at this, I've told you about this, but as my cleric, I'm trying to figure out how to destroy a town full of pirates. And originally I was going to cast Control Weather, but that's 2 levels higher than I can cast. And so I was like looking at my spell list and like, that spell won't work, that spell would only like cover so much. And I've been completely looking at from which one of my spells can I destroy this village with. And it's like, that one won't work, that one won't work, that one won't work. But like, given the terrain and the areas around, like I could use my spells to help me do stuff, but it's like better to think of it as like, are we near a mountain? Could I like cause a rock slide to wipe out part of this village to get an advantage in taking it out? Or could I call up a demon and then have him flood everything instead of like, oh, do I have a spell for flood? It's like, I don't have a spell for flood, but I have control water. Maybe that can do something there. And it's like trying to find the exact cookie fair spell for the situation I want. I don't think works as well as looking at the area and like, how would I actually go about destroying a village if I wasn't a wizard or a cleric? Okay, so that's how I could do it. Now, which cleric spells would help me in doing that?
I'm going to have to stop now.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. But, yeah, it's... Progress isn't always...
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of good new ideas, like in 5th edition, like Advantage and whatnot.
Yeah.
But... don't throw out the past because it's got some valuable lessons in there.
Don't throw out the baby with the dishwater.
Yeah.
I think is the saying.
No, but close.
Bathwater?
Yeah.
That makes way more sense. Alright, take it there.
Yeah.